Are the Knicks a step below the elite in the NBA? If they are, how can they get there? We'll tell you in just a sec on Locked On Knicks.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey, what's up, guys? This is Locked On Knicks, and I'm Gavin, Schall, your favorite play-by-play broadcaster's favorite play-by-play broadcaster and the Saturday host of the Locked On NBA podcast, where I was forced to talk through that miserable Knicks Celtics game this week, and that was not a lot of fun. It's normally more fun than that. He is Alex Wolfe, editor-in-chief of the Strickland, the greatest Knicks website in the whole wide world. You can check them out on all forms of social media at thestrict.land for the best Knicks coverage on the internet. And we said it, but we will tell you again, this is Locked On Knicks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, your daily podcast on the New York Knicks, giving you the most detailed insight on your favorite team 5 days a week. And be sure to join thousands of other Knicks fans in subscribing on both YouTube and your favorite podcast platform for the best insight on your favorite team and as a means of helping the podcast grow. But if that's not enough for you, well, we got even more now. Your favorite podcast has a newsletter introducing the Locked On Knicks daily newsletter, the one-stop shop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox on a daily basis. If you sign up for free at lockedondaily.com, you can start your day every day with writing from Alex and I, our fantastic team of national writers here at Locked On, and of course, Josh Lloyd with the latest and greatest in fantasy basketball. So on today's show, we mentioned the Boston Celtics maybe inspired some existential dread in the New York Knicks. We know you're getting enough of that in your real life these days, so why not get some in your basketball team? To help assuage that, we're gonna answer 3 existential questions. Is the defense good enough to win on the highest level? Can the offense continue to be elite against the best teams in the NBA? And if the answer is no to those first 2, are the Knicks a piece away? What might that piece be? Who might be on the way out? How can we tell? We're going to answer it all right now on Locked On Knicks. So, Alex, we start with that first question. Do you think the Knicks defense is good enough?
I go back and forth because it seems like the margin is so close. You know what I mean? It feels like they are right there with potentially being able to be good enough. So just as a point of reference, the last 4 champions in the NBA, the Celtics were 3rd in defensive points allowed per 100 possessions. The Nuggets were 14th the year prior to that. The Warriors were 2nd the year prior to that. I actually didn't remember that. The Warriors defense was
I didn't either.
Really good that year, apparently. And the Bucks were 10th in 2020 to 21. So it's kind of a mixed bag when you look at the contenders. But that's sort of why we've been saying for most of this year, like for how good the Knicks offense has been at its best, like if they can get top 15, top 12, hopefully maybe top 10, that would be sort of the magic ticket to potentially being contender status. Because if you look at those 2 teams, the Nuggets at 14th and the Bucks at 10th in those 2 years, the Bucks and the Nuggets also were both 5th overall in offense those years per 100 possessions. So the Knicks are already kind of ahead of the curve there. And the Knicks, obviously, if you look at the points per 100 possessions all time, are already, this year, one of the most elite offenses in the history of basketball, not just in recent years or the last 4 years or anything, like the history of the game. They are one of the top offenses to ever step foot on a floor this year. So, I mean, it's interesting to look at those numbers and see that, but currently they're 16th in defense, but within a point of 11th. So it's a very thin margin for error there. I think my big thing is that at full strength, we've seen them able to beat certain types of teams, but not necessarily all the teams. And that's where the issue becomes. I think that we saw in recent weeks, like just the absolute drubbings of the Kings and of the Grizzlies back to back, where they scored over 140 and held them to I think it was 105 or something for the Grizzlies and 120 for the Kings. That their defense can look pretty darn good against teams that oddly, I felt like this was going to be the Knicks' Achilles heel, but oddly against teams that are kind of more wanting to get out and run and whatever, they actually do quite well. And they kind of counterpunch them by being able to go out and run themselves. It's more the teams that play sort of more similar to the way the Knicks want to play, which is the slowed down offense, trying to set deliberate screens and everything else. I feel like the Celtics, like the Cavs, that are kind of the ones vexing them so far this year. And I think the big problem with that, unfortunately, is just the pick and roll defense, the getting around screens, but then, just not having someone there to sort of put the kibosh on things at the hoop once guys get past the first line of defense, which, minus OG Anunoby, it stings extra, but we definitely saw that in that Boston game with how much Tatum and others were just blowing right by the Knicks and completely destroying in the points in the paint battle.
Yeah, and I think what we're looking at here is on both offense and defense, frankly, is there another level for this team? And I was going to save this stat for the third segment, but I think it makes sense to bring it up now. And it's something we've referenced all year. Some of you follow this team, you're probably already aware of. But my maybe single biggest concern in the idea that, like, well, we haven't seen this team's best basketball yet is the fact that we have such a large sample size. They have played 806 minutes so far this year, which I would guess through like whatever 52 games, however many games the Knicks have played so far, is probably a record for any lineup. The next highest lineup in the NBA, I believe, is at 528 minutes. There are only 4 lineups in the entire league that have played at least half as many minutes as the Knicks starting lineup. And in that time, they have a net rating of just 5.4. So that is not the profile of a championship team. You look at some of the other starting lineups throughout the NBA. The Pacers are plus 11. The Clippers are plus 11. The Thunder are plus 16. The Nuggets are plus 11. The Celtics with Al Horford in their starting lineup are plus 19. Weirdly enough, with Porzingis, they're minus 4. To me, that is probably just like reincorporating him, but I'm not sure. The Cavs are plus 8. So I say all that to say they don't profile as a title team in that sense on either offense or defense. So then you have to look at 2 things. Can the players play better despite that sample size in the playoffs? Like, is it just a lack of intensity in the regular season? And I do think that's something to that because we've seen massive fluctuations from OG Anunoby defensively, where he's gone from elite to maybe just slightly above average at his worst. We've seen Mikal Bridges fluctuate between like elite on maybe like a level sub OG Anunoby, but I would still call elite, to pretty bad defensively. We've seen Karl-Anthony Towns, I would say, mostly be quite bad this year, but bad to a sense that he's never been in his career. Like I can post a graphic again on Twitter. I've retweeted this weekend. His rim protection is far and away the worst in his career. His defense at the level has been atrocious. His drop pick and roll defense has been atrocious. So Towns is maybe the one I'm least optimistic about. We've also seen Jalen Brunson fluctuate. We've seen Josh Hart fluctuate. So I do think there's something to that. And then the other question is, tactically, is there anything they could try differently? Alex, I'll let you expand on this. To me, the one thing they haven't really leaned into, which wouldn't really be the solution with Mitchell Robinson, is switching everything. With Towns, like, I think that might actually be the best option. It could be exhausting because you're talking about a scenario where Brunson and Cat are just doing the bulk of your defending in that situation, because teams would just constantly put them in the pick and roll. But it's a great way to cut off threes, and it's a great way to force teams that thrive on ball movement to try to beat you one-on-one. And then I guess the final element is additions, which the Knicks will have in Mitchell Robinson, who was a guy we were talking about as a top 10 defender in the NBA last year. So the question is that enough? And if he's out there, does it affect your offense so much that you're like robbing Peter to pay Paul? Is that the saying? I don't know, but that's kind of where my head's at.
Yeah, I think differentiating things definitely needs to be on their mind. And as much as I think switch everything could be worth exploring, there's one thing, and I don't even know why I'm mentioning it. It is literally never going to happen. But there's a part of me that, based off how often the Knicks get flabbergasted by this, I don't know why they don't try zone every once in a while, if I'm being completely honest. Like, it is the one thing that Tibbs just refuses to do tactically. And yet the Knicks sort of have perfect players for it. Like, if you could have a 2-3 zone with OG and Mikal running it up top, and then Hart and Brunson on the wings, and then Cat in the middle, that sort of gives you that opportunity to have Cat just be planted in the middle and not have to worry about keeping up with guys at the level, and dealing with a pick and roll that way. And, of course, they're still potentially going to run pick and rolls, and you might have to come up and show up a little bit. But, like, I don't know. I feel like it could work. Like, I think they have the right personnel to kind of throw that out there and just see if it sticks. I don't think Tibbs will actually do it, which is the unfortunate part. So in lieu of that, I think switching everything. I mean, Cat has shown to be, outside of maybe like the most speedy point guard or whatever, like, he's shown to be pretty versatile with switching this year. And I think that he's done surprisingly well in space against smaller players and wings and and like smaller bigs. So I'm kind of with you. I think maybe that's the last thing. I mean, they've gotten rid of the aggressive doubles now for the most part and gone more to a everybody sticks with their man sort of scheme. So maybe trying to switch everything every once in a while, particularly in a game like against Boston the other day, maybe that's a little more advantageous for them to do so that they can just make sure that there's always a body on shooters at all times, because that against the hot shooting teams, the teams that can like get hot in a real hurry, that seems to always be an issue for the Knicks.
Yeah. And I think in particular with Jalen Brunson, I mentioned this on today's show, but the main goal is to keep the Knicks out of rotation, right? Because when you're trying to hedge and recover, like a team like the Celtics that is full of great decision makers, like it just brings a lot of pain. You're playing in rotation. A guy gets into the lane, they kick it out. You're closing out. They beat the closeout. They kick it, and we saw in that first game against Boston, like it's still like Celtics fan who would rightfully use in my head rent free, because I think about like just the ball spraying around until a good shot turns into a great shot, turns into the best shot. And Boston, for as much as they dominated the Knicks the other night, we didn't see a lot of that because Tom Thibodeau said, hey, Jalen Brunson, you're going to switch onto Jaylen Brown. You're going to switch onto Jason Tatum. And Brunson held up fairly well. I think it will look even better when OG Anunoby's there, because he is such a brilliant help defender that he, even against a team like Boston, he can give you like a little bit of help to deter Jason Tatum from just going right at Jalen Brunson and still recover out to his man. I just don't think that is something the Knicks can do as a 5-man group, because Cat and Brunson are just not fast enough, not athletic enough to really pull that off consistently. So I think that is a step in the right direction. And then maybe we'll talk about it more third segment, but it will be fascinating to see what Mitchell Robinson brings to the table. Him and Cat would just immediately be the best rebounding combination in the NBA. And that is something that elevates you immediately. Mitch would give them rim protection they don't currently have. I think I just question against a team like Boston, like, does it work to play those two together and just like the speed you need on the perimeter, whether you're switching, whether you're hedging in any coverage, you just have to, you need bigs that can make quick decisions and are mobile. And I don't know if that describes Karl-Anthony Towns and Mitchell Robinson at this point in his career. So that's my worry against the Celtics. I think against the Cavs, it could work really well.
Yeah, for sure. And I think we've got a lot more to talk about, which is the offense, which ironically second in the NBA, or did they drop to third after the Celtics game? Whatever. Top tier in the NBA so far this year, and yet seems to be a little more vulnerable to the best teams in the league. So we want to talk through that and how the Knicks could potentially find ways to get better against the best in the league next on Locked On Knicks. But first, we wanted to let you know about our friends over at Open Phone. Running a small business means you're wearing a lot of hats. Your personal phone becomes your business phone, and before you know it, you're juggling customer calls day and night. As your team grows, it becomes impossible to manage everything with your personal number. That's where Open Phone comes in. It's the #1 business phone system designed to help you keep your work and personal life separate. So for just $15 a month, the cost of a few coffees, you get complete transparency and visibility into everything happening with your business phone number. Open Phone works through an app on your phone or computer and integrates with tools like HubSpot and hundreds of others. It also uses AI-powered call transcripts and summaries, so you'll have a rundown of your calls and and action items the second you hang up. And if you miss a call, no problem. Automated messages are sent directly to your customer, ensuring you never miss an opportunity to engage. Right now, OpenPhone is offering 20% off your first 6 months when you go to openphone.com/lockedonnba. That's openphone.com/lockedonnba for 20% off 6 months. Openphone.com/lockedonnba. And if you have an existing number with another service, OpenPhone will port them over at no extra charge. All right, and we're back in to keep talking through what the Knicks can do to get better against the elite teams in the NBA. And Gavin, I think the thing that we've worried a little bit about is if their offense is a little too easily stopped by the elite teams of the NBA. Again, the sample size of Boston, Cleveland, and Oklahoma City, the 3 teams that are ahead of them in the standings this season. 5-game sample between those teams. In those 5 games so far, the Knicks are averaging 105 points per game in losses to OKC, Boston, and Cleveland this year. And that's not fantastic. I mean, this is a team that lives closer to 120 points per game for the most part. And we've seen score 140 in back-to-back games against decent teams recently. And yet they just can't seem to crack through against these elite teams. And I'm kind of curious why that might be.
Yeah, so I think I would. You referred to them earlier as a historically great offense, and statistically, there's no argument, right? They're off. They are still second in the NBA in offensive rating, just ahead of the Nuggets. I believe their offensive rating. I didn't look it up before the show, but I would be shocked if it's not top 6 in the history of the NBA. It's probably closer to like 4 or 5, 3, 4, or 5 in the history of the NBA. And yet, if I were writing an article, 10 best offenses in NBA history, let's just say, I don't think I'd put the Knicks in there because we've seen, like, again, these like elite defenses have an answer, which I mentioned on today's show, which is just like the core action that makes this offense special is the Jalen Brunson, Karl-Anthony Towns pick and roll. And these great teams can throw a wing on Jalen Brunson, switch that pick and roll, double Towns, and it feels like it is lights out. And I do think there are some mitigating factors there. And the same applies to Cat's defense. Is like he's clearly not 100%. He has not been the guy he was early this season for about a month. And I think it's pretty clear, like obviously there's a knee injury listed on the injury report the other day. That is probably a more substantial factor than the thumb even is at this point. But with that switching defense, I mean, you cut off Towns' ability at the rim, right? Because you just send the second defender there, and Cat has not really been able to burn defenses in conjunction with the Knicks shooters passing out of it, because a lot of times he doesn't. And when he does, we mentioned the shooters don't hit a lot of shots. That's where you really desperately miss Dante DiVincenzo. I think his volume, his accuracy, and the fact that he was not spaced to the 3-point line, he was spaced 25, 26, 27, 28 feet away from the rim. And when you're that far out and you can actually shoot from that far out, it is incredibly painful to help off that guy when you have shooters more like Mikal Bridges and OG Anunoby and certainly Josh Hart that are towing the 3-point line. It is just significantly easier to help those guys. Also, like maybe Mikal does, but just like don't have as fast releases and just aren't quite as willing shooters. So that is the biggest thing I'm seeing. All that's added up to just 105 points per game in losses to Oklahoma City, Boston, and Cleveland. Alex, I'll let you explore this a little bit further or take it in a different direction if you want to, but I pulled up the stats of everyone in the Knicks starting lineup plus Deuce McBride, and outside of Brunson and Deuce, it is not just a Karl-Anthony Towns issue. We've seen Josh Hart, Mikal Bridges, and OG Anunoby all substantially underperform. Maybe Hart a little less than the other three, but to some extent underperform their season averages against these elite defenses.
Yeah, and I think maybe some of it has to do with just the fact that they had some really cold shooting games. I mean, it was that first game against OKC, or the second half of the first game against OKC, and then the second game, I mean, they just couldn't hit anything. The first game against Boston really couldn't. I mean, we saw that was just a massacre on opening night. Yeah. They couldn't make any.
Was actually like decent. It was just that Boston was so overwhelming, and a lot of it was Deuce just had his best game of the season.
But didn't they only score like just over 100 points in the first?
Yeah, their points per possession was really good. They were pretty. I can pull it up, but they shot the ball. They scored 109, and I remember they shot 55% from the field, 37% from three, and barely took any free throws. So it wasn't a great night, but it wasn't a bad night by any means.
Yeah, it wasn't the worst. Yeah. I mean, I could just remember not a lot of threes going in, or at least it felt that way.
Yeah. They had a lot of turnovers, so that was part of it.
But. Yeah, definitely that way against Cleveland as well. I was there for that game. That game was miserable. They just couldn't make anything in that one. But the numbers support it. Like, I mean, Josh Hart averaging 16, 9, and 2 on 48, 28, 77 splits. So that's 48% from the field, 28% from three. 77% from the free throw line. Mikal is averaging 14, 2, and 2 on 44, 25, 0 shooting.
Yeah, and that is on 0.2 free throws. So that means he's taken one free throw in those 5 games, which I would say is the damning number there. But.
Yes, yeah, and the fact that he missed it, he could have been shooting 1,000 or 100% from the free throw line, but he just had to screw it up. But he's shooting almost 6 threes a game. OG likewise shooting 5 threes a game averaging 11, 3, and 3 on 42, 20, 83 in those games. Then Deuce doing fairly well, but I mean, still he's good, not like transcendent. 12, 2, and 3 on 46, 35, 89, shooting the ball. But Cat and Brunson is where it kind of like Cat, it's kind of bizarre. The percentages are insane. 52% from the field, 63% from 3, and 87% from the free throw line. Yet he's averaging 15, 12, and 2, and he's only taking 1.5 threes per game. One of the main things to getting this offense to where it's going to be elite all the time is, I think, finding more threes for Cat. And whatever you got to do to make that happen, like if the other team is really sticking with him, I don't know, finding a way to run double screens for him or something. Like, do whatever you have to do. Just let this guy catch and shoot threes. Like, I don't understand how you can't find ways to make that happen. I mean,
I think it's just that it goes back to the switch, right? Because like other teams will not switch and he will be open on the pop. But when you switch, like he's just not open on the pop. And I think he feels compelled to attack the mismatch off the dribble. When, to your point, maybe the solution should be he pops, and then if a smaller guy switching onto him, even if it's a bigger wing, like just take the three and live with the results. So I'm curious your thoughts on that, but that I think is the basis of the low number in my mind.
Yeah, and I think all you have to do is just feel it out, right? Like just if the three's going in for him. I mean, we've seen on his hottest nights, like think about like the Minnesota game, in Minnesota when he just went nuclear and was shooting it, over Rudy Gobert, no less, and all these other guys that were putting a good contest on him. I mean, I see no reason not to just go for that shot. Like you said, if you get a smaller guy switched on you, Cat, just shoot it. Like it's probably worth more to the team that way, given the fact that he shoots like 40% from 3. Like just take that shot and live with the result. And, if you miss like 3 in a row and you're not feeling confident in the shot for the night, then start putting it on the floor and getting inside. But I feel like it's, especially considering he just doesn't, I feel like especially when he's driving on smaller players, he doesn't seem to get the foul call all that often because bigs just never do get the foul call with smaller guys on them as much. You're not generating foul shots. You're, finishing maybe half the time because even when you do get fouled, it doesn't get called. Why not just shoot the 3? Like it's probably worth more to your team. And then Brunson, 26 and 6 on 46% from the field, 25% for 3, 90% from the free throw line, shoots 4 threes per game, which is low for him. I mean, I think that's just kind of the main thing is that they definitely play that Brunson and Cat pick and roll really tight on the perimeter, these good teams, which is what makes it hard for either of them to just pull up. But I think Cat is sort of the missing skeleton key to that all, in that if they switch, like take that 3. If they don't switch, then look to cut to the hoop and, get a pass from Brunson or something, like, because chances are they're probably trying to double him in that case. So I think that's the way to go. I think the Cat kind of holds a lot of, I don't want to say he's holding the offense back, but he holds a lot of the potential answers to helping them get over the hump against these really good teams, I think.
No, I mean, I think a lot of it boils down to Cat, and it's Cat and how the other guys on this team interact with him. Because again, not to make too fine of a point of it, I think if the Knicks had somehow kept Dante DiVincenzo in that trade, it is just a different conversation, and like things are easier for Cat. I do think there are ways the Knicks can game plan around it, and I said it today, but I think it's worth reemphasizing. Like, have Josh Hart on the ball, because it's like let's just use Boston as the example, right? Boston is putting Al Horford on Josh Hart. So you do that, you're asking a 37-year-old Al Horford, and maybe it's Kristaps Porzingis, like when it's all said and done, and he does this a little bit better than Horford does, but you're asking a center instead of someone like Jason Tatum or Jaylen Brown to in real time switch onto Cat. And if they're doing that, they're going to be closing out at full speed. And Cat can pump fake, and he can take a sidestep 3. He can pump fake and attack the rim with a head of steam, playing 5-on-4. Right. And the other great part of that is like Josh Hart can turn the corner and be the guy attacking the rim, going at whoever's guarding Cat. Like, let's just, like, I don't know if it's Luke Cornett, even if it is a wing, Josh Hart can get downhill on pretty much anyone in the NBA with the step and with the screener like Cat that you have to respect. And then instead of Hart, who no one's guarding, you actually have shooters all around him. And like you get the 5-out effect, because your one non-shooter is on the ball and has to be respected and has to be guarded. My final note before we move on is, like, to the point of teams not guarding Josh Hart, I think a reason that that's even gone further in the wrong direction is like we're going to see teams in the playoffs lean into this even more. We watched the Sixers not guard him at all, and then he made them pay. This year, teams weren't guarding him at all, and early in the season, he made them pay. Before January 1st, 38% on catch and shoot threes on 2.6 attempts per game. Since the start of 2025, just 28%, only taking 2 a game. He has to take more. He has to make more. That is the other element of this Towns equation. It's that Josh, when he's left alone, the Knicks have to get him the ball. He has to shoot, and you have to hope that he's hitting them, because the way this team is built right now, I think that is the only way they can be good enough on offense. They have to get at threes in volume. They have to make threes. That's not just on Josh. It's not just on Cat. But to me, they're the 2 central figures in this equation. But Alex, what if they're not good enough right now? We're going to talk about that next. What are the next steps? We get into it in just a sec on Locked On Knicks. Thanks for sticking with us here on Locked On Knicks. So as much as we want to live in a world where this is the team to get it done, partially because I think when you have a star like Jalen Brunson at 28 years old in the heart of his prime, like every year is worth its weight in gold, right? You can't take anything for granted. You can't assume like, all right, next season things are going to click. Next year's going to be the year. And it's why last season, like we spent a lot of time lamenting Julius Randle getting hurt and then all the ensuing injuries, because last year could have been the year for the Knicks. There's a world I hope this isn't the case. Where we look back on last season, we're like, wow, that was before they traded all the picks, before they got Cap, before they got McHale. That was actually their best team. That was their best chance, and they lost it because of injuries. So you never want to waste a season. You never want to take a year for granted. You particularly don't want to do that once you've spent the majority of your assets and you have very little room to pivot this summer beyond maybe adding a better 6th man or a better 7th man. But the team, we can debate this, like maybe they're willing to move off someone at some point, or the right star becomes available and they combine salaries and trade for him. But Alex, the team sort of is the team. So are the Knicks a piece away? And we're talking existential dread. If they are, like, how do you feel about that? How do they adjust to it? And like, what are the solutions? Because that it could be dire.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the main thing to me is that it's tough to say fully if they're a piece away until they're fully healthy, right?
Sure.
I do actually think, in some ways, I feel like we're maybe overstating what a Mitchell Robinson return could be for this team, and yet in other ways, I feel like we're understating it lately. Like, I do think if he comes back and he is the player that he was at the beginning of last season, or something close to it, then that's a huge addition for this team, and kind of plugs one hole that has been a big issue for them, which is that like Cat at the 5 is great for spacing and great to give them the best offense possible, but isn't always the best answer defensively. And sometimes they need that more like traditional Tibbsy-ish look of having the 2 bigs out there. And, we've seen already, like, not for nothing, we noted this stat I think a couple weeks ago, but Cat and Gobert as a 2-man combo in Minnesota were plus 8.6 points per 100 better in 60 games last season than without them on the floor. So like that's a pretty significant increase in offensive rating there. Like 9 point that lines more up with the numbers that you were showing earlier, where if they get a lineup out there that they can field that's like 9-10 points per 100 better than average opponents, then maybe that's the lineup that they go with down the stretch of playoff games or whatever. And maybe just having that Mitch presence out there, first off, allows an already great rebounder in Cat to just get tons of easy rebounds. And then we've seen how talented he is with outlet passes and everything. So if that's something that starts getting more on the table for the Knicks, where Cat gets easy rebounds, he's able to then push immediately into outlet passes to create easy offense, maybe that sort of starts making up for some of the difference of what you lose without having that 5-out offense out there. But I do think that there's a world where Mitch just is that big addition that the Knicks need, and sort of solves all the problems that not all the problems. Like, I still think they could use another wing. It'd be helpful to have another guy that could just soak up some minutes that apparently is not Landry Shamet. So maybe that's still the answer even with Mitch, but I do think that he lets them play a little more in the way that Tibbs likes to play, with funneling guys into the middle and generating opportunities for a center to makes standout defensive plays like that. So, that would be my first foray into this. As far as like, are the Knicks a piece away? Maybe, but there is a chance that guy is on their team already.
Yeah, I definitely want to see it, and I do think they would kind of have to follow the Timberwolves template to a T, and essentially become an elite defensive team. I know I've referenced this a bunch of times, but I'm still curious to bring Ben Beacon of Locked On Wolves back on and be like, how the hell did that team guard the Celtics? Because I just can't visualize Cat and Mitch like that not being a disaster against Boston, but maybe it won't be, or maybe it's just that Gobert is like it just as great of a defender as Mitch is, like the guy who's won whatever 4 defensive players of the year is just so special. He could single-handedly duct tape that together. But the bigger concern, obviously, with Mitch coming back is offensively, and again, like I'm sorry to keep repeating myself, but like the 3-point volume and the deep spacing, I think the shooting, like if you're going to start Mitch and you're going to start Cat, who is a great shooter, but does not, his value is too high around the basket to have him just sit out there and be out there as like a quote unquote stretch 4, which is what Minnesota reduced him to at times. Like, and maybe that is the solution. Maybe it's saying like, hey, Cat, like limit your game a little bit, but make sure you get up 10 threes. Like, I think if you are starting Mitch, you just have to play a very different brand of basketball than what this team has been playing. And you lose some of the elements that against every team not named the Celtics, the Thunder, or the Cavs has made this team great. Like I talked about it, like Hart cutting to the rim, McHale cutting to the rim, OG Anunoby cutting to the rim, and Karl-Anthony Towns hitting them. Like that goes away when Mitchell Robinson is at the basket and the other team's shot blocker is always at the basket. You're giving that up. So you're saying, all right, we got to hit a lot more threes. We have to lean into what we've been the last 3 years, which has been great, but ultimately hasn't got the Knicks past the second round, which is Jalen Brunson ISO ball. But you know what? There's like an argument that model works. Like you want to talk about a great 5-man unit. Last year, like they had similarly poor spacing when the lineup was Brunson, Devo, Anunoby, Randall, and Hartenstein. I think the spacing in that lineup was a little bit better just because DiVincenzo's so special in that respect. OG was shooting really well, and Hartenstein obviously can stay away from the rim more than Mitchell Robinson can. But that lineup over a big sample size was plus 17. But that to me just highlights the difference between last season's team and this season's team. They did have that lineup that played substantial minutes and was dominant, and the Knicks, at least in terms of the starters, don't have that. We can run through like some of the Knicks do have lineups that have played a decent amount of time that have put up monster numbers. I think the fundamental issue that I'm trying to solve with this team right now is like there isn't a 5-man group where you're not taking something off the table. And Boston is built in such a way that their first 5, like you don't lose anything defensively. Everyone can defend pretty much every spot on the floor, and everyone can shoot, everyone can pass, everyone can dribble. And I just don't see a lineup for the Knicks that is the equivalent of that.
Yeah, I don't know if they have that yet either. Or if they're even going to have any version of that, but also it's going to be really difficult for them to find that, right? Like I think that I guess the main spot is the center spot now, which, Cat, I would say is a little less dexterous than like Porzingis, for example, with the ball in his hands, although I think is a stronger driver overall. And so that helps, that helps mitigate it a little bit. OG is getting better with the ball in his hands, but isn't equivalent to say like Derek White, who, grew up as more of a point guard, in the NBA and then sort of transitioned to being like this do-it-all wing in this stage of his career with Boston. And then, obviously Brunson is a better ball handler than like Drew Holiday, but Drew Holiday's no slouch. Tatum and Brown, versus McHale and Hart. I mean, I guess it's like Tatum is definitely better than McHale, and Hart maybe edges Brown a little bit just by virtue of being able to use both hands a little better. I don't know.
I mean, Brown's a better offensive player than Josh.
Better offensive player no matter what. Yeah, exactly. So, whether he's a better like ball handler or not, Boston just sets situations where Brown doesn't need to be that great of a ball handler to still make something happen. So I think it's part how they're deployed. I mean, I do think maybe it doesn't end up mattering, and maybe the reason that say a Mitch lineup could work against like a Boston is if you just go back to almost like the old Knicks of a couple years ago and and you just kind of concede like, hey, well, you don't even have to really make concessions, because what could end up happening in the most ideal form of what that team could be is that then you get the best of both worlds, where hopefully Mikal and OG are shooting the ball like they can. Same with Brunson and Cat. And then Mitch is just kind of there, instead of cleaning up what was one of the worst three-point shooting teams in the NBA that year, with all those offensive rebounds. He's instead cleaning up, at the bare minimum, a middle of the pack three-point shooting team, and, getting all those misses still and generating extra opportunities, whether it's a dunk for him, whether it's kicking it back out to another shooter, whatever the case may be. He's shown a propensity for that. So I think that would be the thing, that maybe is the way that the Knicks can make moves on the Celtics a little bit, is just try to play a different style of ball from them. And like, we've seen that style work against the Celtics in the past with the Knicks. They've kind of, ironically, they played the Celtics really well for a number of years up until the past 2 years. And that's when things have sort of fallen off. But I mean, they were playing like pretty much like 500 ball against Boston for a while. Like, they were picking up some wins against them. And of course they took their, their losses and whatever, but they had a number of games that were tight late. Obviously the RJ Barrett, like, game-winning buzzer beater, all that stuff. Like, there's been times where in recent years, with worse shooting and everything else, but with like a Mitchell Robinson there, that they've managed, or an Isaiah Hartenstein, that they've managed to make it work. So I think that's kind of my big hope, is that can sort of be the winning formula, to at least give them that like outlier lineup to throw out there against teams, even if then they go back to the normal starting lineup, to close games or to get the offense that they need at times, and that starting lineup can still be like 5 or 6 points better per 100 than opposing teams. And then that can be more okay, because they have more of a rotation with like more solid bench lineups that can give them actually like different looks, rather than just trying to kind of like replicate similar things all the time.
Yeah, I think I'm going to end on a really sour note here, but I think my concern is threefold. It's that like, you look back at 2 years ago, the Knicks with Mitchell Robinson and way less spacing than they'll have with this group, were the third best offense in the NBA. And then they totally tanked in the playoffs. I think we're either the worst or the second worst offense of any team in the playoffs that season over 2 rounds. And then the 3-point volume. Like, I just think like it's a math problem. Boston takes 48 threes a game. That's most in the NBA. The Knicks take 34 threes. Like, I don't see how you make that up. And I think that gap only grows wider with Mitchell Robinson in its center versus Karl-Anthony Towns in its center. Maybe you're deterring more threes on the other end, and that tightens it. But I just don't see how you're getting enough threes up. And my big picture takeaway from all this is, I think the original sin here is losing Isaiah Hartenstein for nothing this summer. And I think when the Knicks still have a lot of time to pivot. Maybe there's a world where Giannis asks out this summer and the Knicks are like, hey, you want Karl-Anthony Towns, and you want to build around him, and maybe you don't want to suck. And like, all's well that ends well, and like, this works out, and the Knicks go on a dynastic run. If that doesn't ultimately happen, I will look back on Hartenstein leaving, because he has just proven in Oklahoma City to be that good, like an all-star caliber impact. There are impact stats that have him as impactful as Karl-Anthony Towns, if not more impactful than Karl-Anthony Towns. And if you had him, you had Dante DiVincenzo. I think to some extent that solves your problems on both ends of the floor a little bit more against the elite teams in the NBA, even if you might not be this all-time dominant offense against the non-elite teams in the NBA. So I'm sorry, that's not a solution. That's me complaining. Sour note to end on. I'm feeling a little sour after that Celtics game, but there's more to talk about. There's a lot of little things, like to your point, just not shooting well against Boston, like missing open shots. And of course, getting OG Anunoby back, that will help. And this Knicks team is incredibly talented. If you really want to be optimistic, let's end on one positive note. Go back and watch that first half against Oklahoma City, because all these issues did not look that bad for those 24 minutes. If there's a way to bottle that and replicate it over a 16 to 28 game run, give me that all day, because then the Knicks can win a championship. Until that point, he is Alex Wolfe. I am Gavin Schall. We will talk to you very, very soon on Locked On Knicks.